and welcome all. Thank you so much for joining in this afternoon for the psychology of fad diets, how to spot them, and why they are appealing with Professor Kima Cargill. We are so thrilled that you could take this time this afternoon to join in on this very interesting and intriguing seminar. Before we begin, just a few general Zoom etiquette housekeeping rules. We will be opening the floor for questions and an open Q&A at the end of our seminar. So I'll ask that questions be held till the end. In the meantime, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker for our seminar, Professor Kima Cargill. She is a professor of psychology and author of Anxious Eaters, Why We Fall for Fad Diets, the psychology of fad diets, and the psychology of overeating, food, and the culture of consumerism. She studies how nutritional beliefs and behaviors are influenced by living in an affluent consumer culture, and how American culture promotes a narrative of self-transformation that distorts our beliefs about free will and agency. She joined the UW faculty back in 2002. Without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over. Go right ahead, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. Will you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Okay, good. All right. It's good to see everyone here. As Diana said, my name is Kima Cargill, and I'm a professor of psychology, and I've been at UW for 20 years. Diana gave a great introduction. I don't have much more to add to that. Here is a little overview of my published work. And what I'm going to be talking about today, what I'm going to focus on, is the book that Diana mentioned, Anxious Eaters, Why We Fall for Fad Diets, which came out last fall. I want to acknowledge my co-author and colleague, Janet Charzan. Janet is a nutritional anthropologist at Penn, and she was my co-author for this book, and we've collaborated on a lot of projects together. And the reason we've been such great collaborators is that we've figured out maybe 15 or more years ago in the kind of food studies world, scholarly world, that when you take a psychologist and a nutritional anthropologist and kind of put them together, it makes for a lot of interesting discussion and analysis. So we always found that each of our training backgrounds were very complementary and have worked together for quite a long time. So I thought I would organize today where for the first part, I'll talk about my research on fad diets. And then for the second part, I'll speak a little bit more from a clinical perspective about better approaches to eating and nutrition, namely empirically validated behavioral approaches. And then we'll save the last part for some Q&A and discussion. So I want to start with a poll. Diana can put the poll up. This is anonymous, by the way. Let's see. Diana, can you post that? Okay, there we go. Are you currently on a weight loss diet of any kind or following a specific eating system for wellness reasons? So what I'm trying to exclude here is medically prescribed diets, say for celiac disease or something like this. This would be something that you've chosen. Now, okay, while those results are coming in, I was thinking about, I'm trying not to look at them and they're coming up on my other screen, but I'm not looking at them because I wanted to guess. And I'm not really sure what to guess. I'm curious what you all think. Would a few of you just post in the chat what you guess might be the percentage of people who are currently on a diet? Let me see how I can see the chat. Oh yeah, how about January? 70, 60, 85. Okay. Oh, no one has guessed even below 50%, I don't think. These are very high percentages. Oh, what about dry January? Is that I hadn't thought about that. You're asking, what about dry January as a weight loss diet or an eating system? Yeah, I'd say it is, even though it's not food related. That's a good question. Okay, Karen guessed 25%. All right, we have a few low guesses. So the research suggests that it's 50% of the population at a given time. Interestingly, that is up very sharply just in 2 years when it was 39%. The reason I wasn't sure what to guess for today, there are a number of confounding variables. So one is it's January. Two is this is a really skewed sample of the people who are here. So one, we all live in the Seattle area, Seattle, Tacoma, Bothell area, the very health conscious area. Or almost everyone here, probably everybody here works at a university. So we have access to healthcare. We're more likely to be nutritionally literate. Oh, and we've all self-selected to be at a talk about diets. So I'm not sure if those things are going to raise or lower the percentage. I think I'm just going to go with 50%. And Diana, you can reveal them now. Okay. Did those come up? Do you see the shared results? It is 48% yes and 52% no. So slightly, Karen's upset. She guessed too low. Well, it's not The Price is Right, so there won't be too much disappointment or penalty for that. Okay, so that's about what would be predicted, slightly less. Now, of that 48%, of course, the thing that we don't know is how many of those are fad diets. And in fact, most people on fad diets, they don't recognize that they're on a fad diet. That's partly what is so insidious about them. It's a little bit like asking someone if they're in a multi-level marketing scheme. They tend not to see that until all of their money is gone. But at the time, it seems, really valid and exciting. Let me, before we go a little further, I do want to define fad diets for you. And we use the Pennington Biomedical Research Group's definition of fad diets. And what they say is fad diets, they ask the user to eliminate one or several food groups. I would think I would add to that, or macronutrients. They promise quick results, such as 5 or more pounds of weight loss a week. They use personal testimonies as proof of effectiveness. And so it's not that personal testimonies are bad, but what they mean there is they use that as proof of effectiveness in lieu of scientific evidence or studies about the diet. They often recommend certain special foods that claim to offer advantages for weight loss, like grapefruit has historically been a big one. Right now, bulletproof coffee, I think, has some of this effect to it, kind of appeals to magic bullet kind of thinking or magical thinking. They often recommend supplements or pills as part of the diet, often endorsed by or advertised by a celebrity, and they often sound too good to be true. So the book that I mentioned, we organized it around specific fad diets like paleo, clean eating. We knew that organizing the book around these kind of recognizable popular diets would make the most intuitive sense to people reading it. What was interesting is that in the early part of writing, we found ourselves repeating the same thing chapter after chapter. And we started talking about it, and it kind of reinforced something that we suspected, which is that it's the same set of fears and beliefs and fantasies that drive nearly all fad diets, even when they look like very radically different diets in terms of what you do or what are the foods. So some of the key points, 4 key points that kept coming up from our book. One is that fad diets make sense. They are culturally logical. The second is that pseudoscientific explanations and fantastical solutions are often more appealing than the truth. So we see this with a lot of the supplement industry, anti-aging, longevity stuff, obviously vaccine alternatives. We like magic. And we want magic to be real, and that gets played out a lot in diets and fad diets. A third key takeaway that you're probably aware of is that diets signal politics and class status. So, for example, paleo has become the diet of choice, if you don't know this, for a lot of alt-right groups and white nationalist groups. There are other diets that we talk about, like clean eating, with the imagery of Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop, that's very class-based and racialized. And then Americans are uniquely and more intensely interested in fad diets. And that's actually the thing I'm going to talk about the most today, partly because that fits in more with the history of my scholarship, and I just find it interesting. So I'll be focusing on that. One thing I wanted to mention is that my work isn't just about weight loss diets. There are a lot of fad diets that are intended to accomplish other things besides weight loss, cleansing, and even clean eating is not necessarily for weight loss. But I am focusing a little bit more on that today because that's what most people think about when they hear the word diet. It's January, and I thought that was a little more in keeping with the whole U's focus on nutrition and wellness. So back to Americans and fad diets. There are three arguments that we make about Americans and fad diets, and I'll touch briefly on each one of those. So they have to do with strong sense of individualism, wish for self-transformation, and living in a highly consumer-oriented culture. So for individualism, I'm sure everyone here knows that this country was founded on the kind of rugged, self-made narrative of the American West. At least that's been the dominating narrative in our history. So it's what we call a settler colonial mentality, ideas about taming the land, the right to conquer, manifest destiny. That cultural history, some scholars refer to it as a frontier mentality. It creates what psychologists call a strong internal locus of control. Locus of control refers to, it's a concept that has to do with the degree to which people believe they exert control over the outcome of events in their lives. And we use this construct throughout psychology. So people with a strong internal locus of control, they tend to believe that the events in their lives are determined by their own actions, their willpower, self-determination, their merit. So the whole concept of meritocracy, for example, rests on the premise of a strong internal locus of control. By contrast, people with a strong external locus of control, they attribute events to forces outside their control. So one example of this might be, imagine a student when receiving exam results. Students with a strong internal locus of control, they're likely to attribute their grade to intelligence or studying, some innate quality about themselves or their behavior. Whereas those with an external locus of control are more likely to view the professor or the testing conditions as the reason for their grade. And that would be true for a good grade or a bad grade. Now, of course, there's wide variation among Americans on locus of control. That's true for any personality characteristic. But as a whole, there's a lot of evidence that Americans have a stronger internal locus of control compared to many other cultures. So think about just the freedom to choose your own spouse, profession, your education, where you live. Those kinds of choices are foreign to a great many people on the planet. I want to show you a little bit of research from the Pew Research Center. And what you're seeing in this slide, the Pew Research Center, they surveyed people in 44 countries, and they asked them whether they disagreed with the statement, or the first graph, is whether they disagreed with the statement that success in life is determined by forces outside of our control. Now, that's a reverse worded question, so it's almost like a double negative. What you're seeing here in the top graph is the percent of respondents in each country who think success is determined by forces inside of our control. So this top graph it's a cross-cultural measure of internal locus of control. And it's interesting. So you see India is at 27%. I haven't seen the raw data. I really am very curious actually what the dots are, the countries below India. And then you see the global median is 38%, and then it starts to get into more of a stronger internal locus of control. And you see the United Kingdom here and the US out in front. I don't know what this one other dot is in front of the US, but I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that it's Australia, because Australia tends to sort of outdo America on these types of cross-cultural surveys. So naturally, this locus of control concept, it has implications for how we think about everything really, but certainly diet and nutrition and the body. Locus of control has been studied extensively by health psychologists. And there's actually something, a measure called weight locus of control. There are a number of ways to assess for it, but there's one called the dieting belief scale, which assesses expectations about whether weight is determined by factors outside of one's control, such as luck or genes or nefarious food companies, versus the expectation that one can control one's own weight through willpower and effort. Here are a couple of the types of items on this dieting belief scale. So things like each of us is directly responsible for our own weight, which would demonstrate an internal locus of control. Or second, most people are at their present weight because that's the weight that's natural for them. And that's something that would demonstrate more of an external locus of control. As you might imagine, Americans have a pretty strong weight internal locus of control, meaning this belief, each of us is directly responsible for our own weight. And that, of course, has a lot of implications that wind up shaming and diminishing people who are overweight or obese or fat. In turn, this overwhelming belief, kind of cultural belief that we have, it also makes us quite vulnerable to fad diets for different reasons. One is simply like if you have a strong internal locus of control, you think you're pretty unstoppable. You think, well, I just have to put my mind to it. These other people did it. I can just pull myself up by my bootstraps and I do anything I set my mind to. So let me go back to Americans and fad diets. And this kind of leads us into the next thing, which is a wish for self-transformation. So with this strong individualism and strong internal locus of control, we also tend to see the self as a lifelong project of improvement and perfection. So it's like living your best self. We can see this evidence of Americans' prioritization, I would say even exaltation of personal growth and self-transformation, and the enormous popularity of self-help books, therapy, makeover shows. Think about how many times you've seen the image of someone standing sideways in a giant pair of pants that used to be their old pants, you know, that they don't, that are like 10 times too big now. I mean, I've probably seen that image, I mean, hundreds, possibly thousands of times in my life. I mean, you see that everywhere. And the ubiquity of just that image kind of demonstrates how we're just drawn to how we prize self-improvement and self-transformation. And then think about all the before and after images you see every single day for makeup, plastic surgery. Now it's a lot with home renovations as well. I did a Google image search for before and after, like that's it, just a before and after in quotation marks. And the results are about half are people's faces, like cosmetic surgery before and after. About maybe 40% or 45% are people's bodies, diet or surgery before and after. And there's a very small share of like hair loss and hair restoration images. So this belief in the power of personal growth, it goes back to the idea that we can control our behavior, tame our bodies, manipulate our personal fortunes and our destinies. And these may seem like universal or innate personality characteristics. You might think, well, of course I have a lifelong project of improving myself, but they're really quite unique and culturally specific. As you saw in that Pew research, many people around the world would see themselves at the mercy of larger economic, cultural, and environmental forces. The third argument we make about Americans and fad diets is the power of the belief that consumerism and spending money solves problems. And we see this in fad diets like Atkins or Whole30, where these diets are often branded and they involve the dieter spending money on special foods or membership in an organization. Weight Watchers is okay. Or the services of a professional nutritionist or a personal trainer or coach. And it's not that those things are bad to do. It can be great to see a dietitian or have a personal trainer. But those things exemplify how we sort of kind of throw money at problems to solve problems. It's kind of the first line of defense. So it's very easy for us to feel like if we have a problem, there's a solution for it. And usually that solution is for sale. It's a consumer product. Paradoxically, a lot of those diets like Atkins and Whole30, they often wind up adding foods, these special foods that are intended to substitute and replace the foods they want you to remove. So these diets appeal to a uniquely, or not uniquely, I should just say strongly, American practice of shopping to solve problems, and the belief that there's a consumer product that can solve those problems. Not exempt here in this corner from that belief. It's very easy to fall into that. But think back on your own history of diets, or if you don't think of it as a diet, just some kind of nutrition plan. So whether it was a weight loss diet or not, did you wind up spending more money than usual on special foods or just different foods? Did you go to the store and stock up on a whole bunch of stuff? Or a membership or consultation fees, or for books or video content. So again, many of us experience diets as a consumer product rather than just thinking what is almost too obvious, which is just, I'm going to eat a little less food, which actually doesn't cost anything, but it's often the last line of defense. Okay, so let me transition here to some better ways to think about nutrition and eating, kind of moving away from what not to do to what to do. Now, I do want to make a little disclaimer. This is outside of my direct area of research. It's more in my clinical area of expertise, but I want to emphasize I don't have a lab where I study effective weight loss. There are a lot of scientists here at UW who have much better expertise on the science of weight loss than I do. But I found that giving a talk about everything that's wrong with nutrition and diets leaves people asking, well, then what should we do instead? So I like to offer something. So generally focusing on any specific diet, any named diet is not the best approach. I really think it's a lot better to approach nutrition and weight management from a psychological perspective, and I'll explain what I mean about that. A cognitive behavioral approach, you may have heard of that, or you may have heard of CBT. It's just what it sounds like. It's empirically validated methods for changing the way you think about food and eating, changing your cognitions and behaviors. And these methods, CBT is used throughout psychology for many things, treatment of phobias, depression, PTSD, all kinds of things. So the way I've organized this part is I wanted to describe a few books that I often recommend to people and that I often recommended to people when I was in clinical practice. And I have a reference slide at the end that I think Diana will circulate, and you can email me and I'll send that to you as well. So notice that neither of these first books are actually about eating or food or dieting. Remarkably, neither one of these is written by a psychologist either, but they are draw on or are consistent with psychological research. And all the books I'm mentioning are written for the general public. They're interesting, they're readable, they're on bestseller lists. They're not stuffy academic works. Atomic Habits, this is a wonderful book. And James Clear, he identifies atomic habits as little habits that are part of a larger system. He calls them the atoms of our lives. So they're regular practices or routines. They're small, they're easy to do, and they compound into big results over the years. So they can seem insignificant, like they're not even that hard. But as they build on each other, they become a component of the system of compound growth. Just like saving a little bit of money every week might not be that hard, but in 15 years, you have a nice bundle of money. So it's a way of taking a long game approach to behavior, in this case to eating, that's far more effective than the short-term promises of fad diets. And one thing I like about this book is it can really help deal with the impatience that comes from how long it takes to experience results when we change our behaviors. It really takes quite a long time if it's going to be lasting. And that can be one of the hardest pills to swallow for people is in thinking about eating plan, nutrition, is to change your mindset from thinking about months or weeks or months. You've got to switch to thinking about years or even decades. And, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm out. I don't want to wait that long. But what's interesting is if you really lean in to this long game mentality, it's surprisingly liberating. It actually kind of tempers that strong internal locus of control that we have where we're just trying to bend and tame ourselves and discipline ourselves all the time to become better. It's freeing from that. So the big takeaway on Atomic Habits is if you want better results, forget about goals and focus on systems. Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin, it has some similarities to Atomic Habits, but the focus is more on how habits and establishing systems of habits eliminates the need for self-control. I'm going to just let that wash over you for a minute. Eliminates the need for self-control. You can invisibly raise your hand if you like that idea. I like it a lot. If you're not familiar, there's a lot of psychological research that shows that that most of us are not very good at using self-control to resist temptation. In fact, what's funny is a lot of people who are rated as having strong willpower, rated by others as having strong willpower, they actually don't. It's an illusion once you start getting into it. And what you find is that those people, they create this illusion because they have an understanding of how to create systems that let them avoid using willpower, that let them avoid depleting willpower. So a couple of quotes that I pulled from Better Than Before. Habits make change possible by freeing us from decision-making and self-control. And habits mean we don't strain ourselves to make decisions, weigh choices, dole out rewards, or prod ourselves to do things. So the way this book counters fad diet thinking is that it's kind of telling you how you can hack your way to your goals. Okay, the next couple books, give me just a second, I'm having a little technical problem. Fortunately, I have backup of every single thing that I would possibly need for this. So I just need to find my place here. Okay, the diet trap solution. There was an earlier version of this book called The Beck Diet Solution. It's kind of the same thing. It might be out of print now. You may recognize the name Beck if you've studied any psychology. Aaron Beck was a pioneer in cognitive psychology, and this book is written by his daughter and granddaughter, who both practiced cognitive behavioral therapy with weight loss patients. So this one is not promoting any specific type of eating plan. There's nothing in it about nutrition. It's helping you identify behavioral cues, what they call them traps, in order to modify behavior. And they also help you start to identify the cognitions that go along with self-defeating behavior, in this case, self-defeating eating. So those are examples like, I'm on vacation, or I spent so much time making this, or my number one favorite, but I had such a hard day. All kinds of distortions like that, rationalizations like that. The next book, The Ultimate Volumetrics Diet. It's funny, I had seen this book around for years, and I always thought it was a fad diet book. And first, the word volumetrics, I just thought was weird. I thought it kind of sounded like just this made up, catchy name. And then there's some other things like feel full on fewer calories. Or also it says with a 12-week diet plan. I guess 12 weeks is not that long for a lot of these diets, but I still think, promising a number of weeks is a red flag. Anyway, then I noticed one time this is written by Barbara Rolls, and Barbara Rolls is an extremely well-respected nutrition science researcher at Penn State. And she actually collaborates with a number of UW scientists in her research. And she's published hundreds of peer-reviewed studies. And so this book, it's all based on empirically validated findings. So a lot of her research is on portion size and satiety, which is the feelings of fullness. And one of the things that she does in this book is she teaches you about energy density or caloric density. It's a formula, a quotient, which is calories divided by grams. So if you want, you can learn how to calculate that on foods you commonly eat, or you can use, there are a number of charts online. Let me show you. I think that one is from online. So see the quotient has been calculated in the second column here. And I forget exactly, she has in the book sort of, she wants you to have a certain proportion of your diet, be in the low CD calorie density range and a certain number in medium and limited from the high. But you can kind of look here and see, yeah, okay, Nutella is not as filling as a banana, although it's pretty tasty. We kind of start to learn about this calorie density, and oils and fats are at the very top of the list. And you start to learn a little bit more how to choose from those different categories. There's also a lot of good pictures in this book that I wanted to show you that kind of illustrate her research. So this first one, you see it's the same foods on every plate, just kind of different configurations. And the one on the left, it's 800 calories, and it's a higher calorie density there. And then you see that cut in half to 400 calories, but there's still a higher calorie density. So you see what happened there is it looks like they just cut the steak in half and cut the potato in half. So basically, if you go from plate A to plate B, which might be what a typical diet recommends, just eat, less food or fewer portion size, smaller portion sizes. But then you see the third plate it's a very attractive plate with a lot of food, That one has 400 calories and it has the lower calorie density. And that's because of the way they've reconfigured the vegetables there and the potato and the steak. So she goes through a lot of her research findings and depicts them in the book. Okay, on this one, oh yeah, these are all 150 calories of some kind of meat or protein. And then she shows obviously the higher calorie density ones are the sausage, the lean ground beef, and so on. And then you get to the snapper, which is the lower calorie density. And amazingly, that's like 3 times the weight of the sausage. And so she's done a lot of research about how the more food with lower calorie density leads to feelings of satiety. People are very happy with these meals afterwards, and they do a lot of controlled studies, which she describes some of them. And then this one is, okay, both of these are 400 calorie breakfasts, and you'd probably pick the one on the right. That looks like a better breakfast because it's just more food. And the one on the left, I think what they switched, so there's a lot about swapping out in this book. And I think for this one, I do remember that the left picture, it's granola, which is very high calorie density. And so they switched to, I think, bran flakes, and they put in some bananas. And then I think they swapped skim milk for whole milk, and probably the coffee was sweetened and left. I'm not sure all the things that they do. But she's showing you, visually, these visual cues when people in her studies walk in and there's a meal in front of them, your brain gets certain signals about what's on the plate that thinks, oh, that's a nice size meal. I'm gonna be happy with that. In fact, one of Barbara's studies showed that people who decreased their average calorie density every day, they wound up cutting 500 calories. They ate 2/3 of a pound more food than before, and they still lost weight. So that's a lot with the volumetrics plan. It's also sometimes just called volume eating, like if you just want to Google it. Okay, a few other topics I wanted to touch on, time permitting. Food tracking. I do recommend food tracking. Not everybody does. I don't recommend it for anyone who's struggled with an eating disorder or highly restrictive eating. It can be a real tool for self-tyranny in the wrong hands. So I always ask people to give thought about whether that's something that might lead them to obsessive or unhealthy thinking. For most people, tracking food, at least for a little bit, it's pretty eye-opening. In fact, there are studies where they ask participants to track their daily food, and they tell them, they say, okay, we want you to track your food every day for 3 months or something like that, but don't try to lose weight. Just write down your food or just put it in this app. Guess what happens? They lose weight, even when they're told not to try. So just that self-awareness leads to behavioral change. And so I'll kind of point out that this tracking for many people could be one of the atomic habits that James Clear writes about in the book that I mentioned. And there are a number of apps that let you do this, like MyFitnessPal, Lose It. It's a little better if you have a kitchen scale where you can weigh things, which costs like $10. So you probably heard there's a lot of research that shows how we underestimate portion sizes and underestimate calories. There's a lot of research just on how bad we are at estimating those two things. So my point is, when you measure your food or track your food, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, it can be really sobering. It's like, oh, so that's 5 ounces. Depending on what you thought 5 ounces was before, it can be pretty surprising. I don't suggest necessarily that people weigh and track their food forever. Some people get into that and like it, great. For a lot of other people, that just is a horrible thought. So I think it can just be a good lesson for a little while to get that reality testing, and it helps train your mind to develop better judgment. Another thing on the tracking is you really don't have to calculate the calories. Honestly, if you can write it down in a notebook without any calories, any numbers, and even there's research that shows just that leads to some weight change. On that note, I wanted to mention that I'm not a big fan of intuitive eating, which is pretty big right now. I just was asked to peer review an article on intuitive eating, and it's interesting. I want to believe in it, but the reality is the research shows we just don't have good intuition for food. And one of the reasons for that is that food scientists, people who get their PhDs in chemical engineering and food science, they devote their whole careers to making all kinds of irresistible flavors and products that are intended to hijack intuition, or in more scientific terms, they're designed to bypass the brain, the neurological signals for satiety. There's something called vanishing caloric density, which refers to foods that just kind of like disappear in your mouth, so you don't register getting full. Cheetos is kind of the classic example. Krispy Kreme donuts, also a good one. So I would love to believe in and rely on intuitive eating, but I don't trust my own intuition one bit. I think it's actually just sort of a new kind of magical thinking. In fact, if I were going to write a diet book, I might call it counterintuitive eating, because I don't think our intuitions and instincts lead us to good places. The very last thing I wanted to mention is that, we've all been taught eat less, exercise more. And you should exercise more. We've all been taught to think about this calories in, calories out. And it's easy to think, oh, I went for a run, or I did this class today, so now I can have this, fill in the blank. It's also referred to in psychology as moral licensing. Well, guess what? Turns out that was wrong. A lot of research has come out in the past few years. Some of the most high profile is by this fellow, Herman Poncer at Duke. He's the one who's kind of written a lot of op-eds and really kind of gotten it out there in the public imagination. And what his work and many other people in this sort of consortium have shown, their work with hunter-gatherer tribes, show that exercise doesn't increase our metabolism the way we imagine it does. Daily, we tend to burn calories with a very narrow range, no matter what our activity level is. So it's kind of like, imagine when your phone goes into low power mode, and it does a bunch of different things, like it dims the screen a little bit, and it'll stop uploading things in the background. That's kind of what your body does when you exercise. It goes into low power mode. So the rest of the day, you just use fewer calories to sleep or digest food, to sit and read. You compensate for the exercise by using fewer calories in other activities. So there are a lot of diets and apps that encourage you to subtract calories or subtract points when you exercise. Stop. It's really kind of just about food. Now, you should, of course, exercise for your brain and your heart, and to not get depressed and to not age as rapidly. There are a lot of good reasons to exercise. It's just not so much for weight loss, at least not as much as we thought. The one example, one exception to that is actually weightlifting. The research I mentioned, Herman Poncer's, that's really on cardio, on people's belief about cardio. Strength training adds muscle, which is more metabolically active than fat. So that falls in a little bit different category. And let's see, seeing the time, I'll just say, Herman Poncer, he has a lot of other work out. I mean, if you're interested in this, you don't have to go read a whole book on it. I think he has a New York Times Magazine article, and I saw another, I think something in Scientific American just a couple weeks ago. So you can just kind of Google him and get the main picture of his work in a lot of those articles that have come out in the past couple of years. So I think with that, I'm gonna ask Diana to come back in so we can have some questions and answers and discussion.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we will be opening up the chat room, the chat for any questions that may have risen during our presentation. You are, oops, see, put my face there. You are also welcome to raise your hand, and we will call out anyone who may have questions. So thank you again so much, Professor, for that informative presentation. If anyone has any questions, we'd love to hear them. Give it just a few more moments. Yes. Hi, Karen.
Hello. Thank you for putting this together. I did have a question. I missed the piece where I believe you were discussing tracking, just simply tracking your food. And then it's followed up by, well, they lost weight by not even trying. I think I missed what the actual behavior steps were.
Yes, that's a good question. I kind of relied on you to make the inference. And by the way, thank you for coming and thank you for your engaged participation. Yes, what happened there is, they asked people to start tracking and they say, don't try to eat less. But basically what happens is to just try to do a thought experiment. You're writing down or you're tracking in an app what you've had to eat today. And then you've had dinner. You're like, I have a hankering for something sweet. Wonder if I should have it. And then you kind of look, or you just remember one that you already had a cookie, in the office kitchen, or some other things you and you go, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I could just wait till tomorrow or wait for another time. And so what happens is, it just keeps in the front of your mind what you've already eaten that day or even that week. It might be like, oh, I've been having sweets every day this week. I need to just like take a couple days break from that. Or it could be alcohol, which of course has a lot of calories, where you think, oh, wow, I didn't realize I was having a glass of wine every single night. Maybe I can have like one night off a week, or the dry January. So it's just the self-awareness by itself without actually saying, I'm on a diet, kind of just changes the behavior. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
I have a question. Do you have any suggestions for kind of practicing compassion around food decisions that we're making, or like kind of not shaming or guilting or judging or critiquing? You mentioned kind of getting stuck in that space earlier, and that really resonated with me. And I wondered if you had any thoughts or suggestions for moving through that space.
Yes. That's a great question. I might have you email me. There's actually a really nice body of work on self-compassion. It's come out mostly from University of Texas, and a great book on self-compassion. I can't quite recall it on the spot. But in terms of what I was talking about, yes, I think, when I was mentioning those books, Atomic Habits and Better Than Before, what I really like about them is when you develop those habits or those systems, you're kind of taking away this moral element to things. So if you go back to that concept of the strong internal locus of control, with the strong internal locus of control, that's going to make me have thoughts like, I should be able to control my body. Like, why aren't I just working hard enough or making good choices? You know, I'm a failure, I'm lazy, that I can't do this and other people can. And it can be very, you can experience a lot of shame and self-judgment. And that's what a lot of, you know, fat shaming comes from, is the idea that, well, you're just not trying hard enough. And so what I like about the habits book I mentioned is that they let you kind of relax on that moral part. There's some failing you're doing, and you're just focusing on these very small things. So it might be like, I don't know, a few years ago, I used to put sugar and half and half in my coffee every day. I thought, you know, I need to like dial back on the sugar when I started seeing a lot of the sugar research coming out. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to go cold turkey on this. And then I did a little trick that psychology behaviorists would know about, where then for a period I started putting heavy cream in my coffee just so I had that little luxury to get used to the not sweet taste. And then I dialed back on the cream. And so, you know, over the years, I mean, now I don't even think about it. I always drink black coffee. That's a pretty big change when you think about that much sugar every day over the years. You know, or another one would be, I bought one of these, you know, like the olive oil spray you can buy now. I used to buy these big tins of olive oil, big tins. And then I bought the spray because I thought, oh, that'd be easier to use on toast. And then I, you know, did it on toast and I liked it. And so I was like, oh, this has more uses. I like this. So I just kind of accidentally started using this spray more often than the big tin of olive oil. I still use that for some things, but I noticed over time, I used to order those big tins about every couple months. And I think a year passed and I didn't order one of those. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I actually kind of went in, I tried to calculate how much less olive oil my household was consuming just by kind of switching to not even using that spray all the time, just sometime. And it was hard to do because I didn't have like receipts for, you know, I didn't know exactly how much I bought of each thing, but it turned out to be like a huge reduction in the consumption of olive oil, which I wasn't even trying to do. I wasn't worried about that, but I just noticed, that little habit really added up over time. So those are examples of kind of things that I think, interventions that are a lot better than just self-shaming and self-reproach, and focusing on those habits kind of takes you into more of a space of self-compassion. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I am getting some questions in the chat. This was sent directly. I hear more recently about binge eating disorder. Do you think this is a backlash from our long history of diet culture?
Can you say it one more time? So you're hearing an increase in commentary about binge eating disorder? Is that what I heard?
Yes. So to reread the question, I hear there's more commentary about and around binge eating disorder. Do you think this is a backlash from our long history of diet culture?
I don't know. I don't know enough about that area, but what I will say is that binge eating disorder wasn't even included in the DSM, our diagnostic manual, until fairly recently. It was actually kind of a big fight to get binge eating disorder put in there. Historically, there was just anorexia and bulimia, the two eating disorders, and clinical facilities were finding, but we have all these people who are obviously suffering. They obviously have some, you know, disordered eating behavior, and we don't have a diagnosis to treat them. So their insurance company won't pay for it, and we don't have methods for treatment. So I think some of it is just, you know, how sometimes we just become more aware in the clinical community. We learn more about a condition that we didn't understand. So as far as being a backlash, I don't think I can answer that part of the question. I'm not sure. I'd certainly say it's possible. By the way, I want to mention, I did notice in the chat, Susanna Myers, thank you, posted, Kristen Neff was the person I was trying to think of at University of Texas, and her books on self-compassion are so good. And she probably has a TED Talk and stuff like that.
Wonderful. And I'll be reading a few of the questions that came in order. Would you consider intermittent fasting a fad diet?
I knew someone was going to ask that. Okay. So one thing, there's a distinction made in the research literature between intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. So intermittent fasting is where people actually don't eat for maybe 2 days, or they just have some soup or something. And time-restricted eating is when people have like a window or maybe 6 hours or 8 hours they're eating and they're fasting the rest of the time. And most often I hear that time-restricted eating kind of referred to as intermittent fasting. So I'm going to assume that you might be asking about that, about eating in these windows. No, I don't know. I don't consider that a fad diet. I do think it does seem a little fatty, and I think some people, not fatty, faddy, and I think some people might get kind of really dogmatic about it in a way that's more characteristic of fad diets. But the research is great on time-restricted eating, not necessarily great on weight loss. It seems like there are some people who are pretty responsive to it for weight loss and others not. But for metabolism, for not getting cancer, for sleeping, for all kinds of things, it's great. And oh, I should have mentioned, there's a book I really like called, I think it's called The Circadian Code by Sachin Panda at Scripps. And so it's about a lot of things, the circadian code, but a lot of his research is on time-restricted eating and just the amazing results he gets. In fact, there are studies where they have people in trials for time-restricted eating, and they go back to them like a year later. And it turns out the people are still doing it. They're finished with the study. They've moved on with their lives. And the researchers say, well, why are you still doing this? They say, I just like it. I just feel better. I just sleep better. So I think it's definitely like fasting at least 12 hours overnight is very important for cellular turnover and metabolism and general health. And then more than that, people can experiment with and try to see if they might lose weight.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. This is the last question. What can you say when people totally misunderstand how a diet such as keto works?
I don't know, because almost all I hear is people misunderstanding diets and misunderstanding nutrition. And a lot of times people don't want to be corrected or feel that they're being insulted if you try to explain it. So I don't, when you ask what can I say, I don't usually say much because it doesn't often go well. But if someone's asking questions, then I might try to explain something. I think that's the best I can answer there.
Understood. Well, I think that was the very last question, and with that, the end of our time together. I want to thank everyone for tuning in and asking these questions and participating in the poll. Thank you so much, Professor, for taking this time to engage with us and share about your book and your research. Before we head out, where can we find out more about your book or any upcoming research or talks that you have?
You could email me. I realized I also forgot to post the references, which is my last slide, and I'd be happy. I'll send those to you, Diana, and anyone can email me, kcargill@uw. And my book is, at the bookstore and on Amazon and stuff like that. Thank you for mentioning it.
Fantastic. We will be sending out the link to this recording as well as all your slides and resources later on this week. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Of course. Bye.